When you think of the greatest drivers of all time, your mind inevitably conjures up images of people like Michael Schumacher, Max Verstappen, and Ayrton Senna. Great drivers in motorsport generally have three things in common: talent, motivation, and fearlessness. These three things give a driver the ability to operate their car on the absolute limit. A great driver can shut off the primal urge to brake earlier, turn lighter, and avoid the other vehicles on track. They can continue to pilot their machinery at its speediest while being at one with the car's mechanics, balancing pure performance with the need to maintain the contraption's delicate mechanics and tires. We have all seen examples of these characteristics as motorsports fans. For example, take Lewis Hamilton's incredible victory at the 2020 British GP, where he carried the Mercedes team to a victory despite a front left tire puncture on the very last lap. All this while future F1 champion Max Verstappen chased him down. Or bring your mind back to Gilles Villeneuve at the 1979 French Grand Prix, where he and René Arnoux fought fiercely to secure a podium finish. Villeneuve refused to back down to Arnoux, swapping positions with him multiple times and even making contact with the Frenchman. Despite the danger, Villeneuve used his aggressiveness to overpower Arnoux and ultimately took second place in one of the most legendary battles in Formula One history. Lastly, to give you an example of the talent that lies within all of the greatest motorsports drivers, look at Pierre Gasly's win at Monza in 2020. Despite driving inferior hardware, Gasly's experience and determination brought him and the AlphaTauri to a victory in the Temple of Speed. Today's video is a story about a driver who embodied these values on the track and inspired a generation off the track. Despite being surrounded by tragedy and death at a young age, he developed a will to win and a driving style that would amaze and excite fans from all around the world. Jackie Stewart, the three-time F1 champion, once said of him, "Across my career, it was him who was the toughest, the most competitive. His meteoric rise shocked and delighted, but he is often forgotten as he left this earth at the absolute pinnacle of his greatness. In fact, he is the only ever posthumous F1 champion. He is Jochen Rindt." Rindt's story begins at the tail end of humanity's greatest tragedy. Rindt was born in Mainz, Germany on August 18, 1942. At the instance of his birth, Rindt became another victim of the deadliest conflict in human history, World War II. While Rindt survived his brush with the Second World War, his parents were not so fortunate. At just 15 months of age for Rindt, his parents were both killed in an Allied bombing campaign on the city of Hamburg, Germany. Rindt and his older brother Uwe were both evacuated to Upper Austria before the bombing. This began Rindt's many near misses with danger. Rindt never forgave the German regime for ultimately being responsible for his parents' death. He vehemently denied identifying himself as German, instead opting to shed national labels later in life. He once told a reporter, "I am a European," in reference to whether he identified as Austrian or German. This anti-nationalist attitude would help Jochen transcend boundaries in motorsports and demonstrate that he would march to the beat of his own drum. Jochen Rindt was a troublemaker in his younger years. He was known to zoom down hills when skiing, and even raced around on a wooden scooter as a boy. One of his teachers recalled, although he rode like a mad thing as he took to the curves, he never crashed into anyone. He eventually graduated to racing cars in his spare time as an amateur. At 16, he and fellow future race car driver Helmut Marko grew a budding friendship into fierce competition on the mountain roads of Austria. It was here that Rindt developed his courage and translated it to performance on the road, avoiding the steep drops of the mountains while aiming to keep his friend Helmut behind him through the corners. Rindt was already alive, but his racing spirit was born here. In 1964, Jochen Rindt let the world know he was here. Rindt began his Formula racing career in Formula 2. Nowadays, Formula 2 is known as a feeder series where young upcoming talent hone their skills while waiting for a coveted Formula 1 seat to open up. Back when Rindt was racing though, Formula 2 had much steeper competition, as Formula 1 drivers were allowed to compete in the underpowered vehicles in addition to their F1 duties. This means Jochen would have to fight off motorsports legends like Jim Clark and Graham Hill in the winding street circuit of downtown London created for the Crystal Palace Grand Prix of 1964. This did not deter Rindt's desire for grace and glory early in his career. Just the day before the Grand Prix, Rindt raced at Mallory Park in a Formula 2 race driving a Brabham Cosworth car. Rindt was virtually unknown at the time, but he ended up snatching pole position in qualifying against the steep competition of future Formula 1 champions Jim Clark and Denny Hulme. Interestingly enough, Rindt had asked Hulme before the qualifying to follow him round for a few laps, as this was the first time the Austrian had even seen the Mallory Park circuit. This was talent. Rindt transferred his otherworldly, God-given skills onto a track his mind was blind to and put his Brabham Cosworth on pole position. Unfortunately, this did not translate to a race win, as Jochen flubbed the start and had to battle his way back to third. Jim Clark took the win at Mallory Park, but Rindt took the glory, as he was suddenly thrust into stardom in the motorsports world. Fans would not have time to stew on Rindt's podium finish, as the qualifying for Formula 2 at Crystal Palace would begin the next morning. Jochen and his mechanic at the time quickly packed up and headed to the race, where he would really make a name for himself. At the time, the race qualifying was separated into two heats, which were similar to the F1 sprints of today. The first heat featured the racers and machinery expected to lead the race, and the final order of the heat would determine the starting grid. The second heat featured up-and-comers such as Rindt. He won the heat, which meant he would start from the front row with Jim Clark and Graham Hill. At the time, 4 cars made up the front row. Hill asked before the start of the race, "Who is the boy alongside me? Is he a skier?" Early in the race, Rindt witnessed Hill's Cooper malfunction, which caused major understeer for Hill and gave Rindt an opportunity to pass. Rindt would hold the lead of the race from this point, while his competitors battled behind. From the book Jochen Rindt, Uncrowned King of Formula 1, lap after lap, the Brabham would slither around, its tail well out, as Jochen sawed the wheel from lock to lock. Author David Tremaine adds to this description of Rindt's racing style by noting that Rindt was not losing time by driving this way. He was ultimately helping the car turn into the tight corners of the street circuit without the need to slow down before turning. The British motorsports driver Alan Rees recalled about the heat before the race. On every corner, he did what looked like a half spin. I started to get the message that this bloke must have known partly what he was doing, and I thought, geez, he's not going to lose it, even though he looks it every time. Rindt's aggressive driving style inspired and amazed fans at Crystal Palace. Unlike the established champions, who looked slow despite their speed due to their smoother driving styles, Rindt looked fast. This was new, this was exciting, this was the supreme skill of Jochen Rindt. He took home the trophy for the Grand Prix and announced himself to the motorsports world. Let's fast forward to 1965, about a year after Rindt put himself on the motorsports radar. This time he was slated to race in the fabled 24 Hours of Le Mans, an elite test of endurance and skill for the world's best racers. Rindt would be paired with Maston Gregory, an erratic American driver who had participated in 8 of the Le Mans races previously without a win. The two drivers were selected by Luigi Chinetti, a multiple-time Le Mans winner himself, to drive his Ferrari 250 LM for the North American Racing Team, also known as NART. Rindt was such a late addition to the driver lineup that Motoring News, a premier motorsports magazine at the time, didn't even have him listed as a driver for the race, just a week before the event. Most fans were more focused on what would be the next chapter in Ford and Ferrari's battle for motorsports dominance at the mythical French circuit. The race did not start off on fair footing for the Austrian-American pairing. Owner of the team Luigi Chinetti was under the impression that Goodyear would be providing tires for the 250 LM for the race. Due to a miscommunication, Goodyear had not brought tires for the privately operated team. This left Rindt and Gregory with one option: drive the entire race on the narrow wets that Chinetti brought with him to the circuit. Despite not being ideal for the circuit, the drivers were noted to love racing on them. Rindt and Gregory adapted to the less than ideal conditions and would end up running 11th fastest in practice, which doubled as qualifying at the time. The team would start behind the factory powerhouse cars of Ferrari and Ford, but mechanical issues for both teams quickly thrust Rindt and Gregory into the front of the pack. Jochen battled with 1963 Le Mans winner Lorenzo Bandini for 8th place before handing the vehicle off to his partner Gregory. Masta was only on track for about 90 minutes before he had to return to the pits for an engine issue. This looked like the end for NART, as a mechanical issue with the engine meant it was only running 6 of its 12 cylinders. This shot Jochen's confidence in the car, and he promptly made his way to the parking lot to leave the track early. Meanwhile, the mechanics for NART had diagnosed the issue and got the car up and running again. Gregory chased after Rindt, finding him in the parking lot waiting for his car to be unblocked. Rindt was dejected, telling Gregory there was no way they could win the race now. Gregory, a man with extensive experience at Le Mans, explained to Rindt that being 10 laps down as they were was far from insurmountable. Now, this just wasn't true, but Gregory desperately needed Jochen to stay in the race for even the slightest chance at Le Mans glory. From that point forward, Rindt and Gregory made a legendary motorsports pact. They would drive completely on the limit of the car, totally flat out. If the car breaks, it breaks, but they certainly were not going to lose this on their pace. The two men made their way back through the pack with the help of mechanical failures ahead of them. They raced throughout the night, passing Works Ferrari and Ford cars on their way to motorsports glory. In the midst of the great war between Ford and Ferrari, a lone mercenary car led by Rindt and Gregory carved a name for itself into the tarmac of Le Mans. By dawn of the next day of the race, they had guided the Ferrari 250LM to second place behind the Belgian national racing team in their own 250LM. Fortune would favor the bold though, as a tire puncture and subsequent body damage incident would require the Belgian car to enter the pits for repair. This gave Rindt and Gregory the opportunity to take the lead and never look back. Near the end of the race, Rindt and Gregory both had to slightly go back on their decision to drive flat out to the end, as their car's engine began to give out. Gregory took charge for the final 90 minutes of Le Mans, securing a win that would stand out in the legacy of himself and Jochen Rindt. As for Rindt, he had proven he could be successful in the speedy single-seaters of F1 and F2, but today he etched his name into the history books with pure speed, even when the car's reliability had been in serious question. He didn't give up, and it showed in his fearlessness on the battlefield created by Ford and Ferrari. Rindt and Gregory would end up being drivers of the last Ferrari vehicle to win Le Mans until 2023. In 1970, Rindt was at his hungriest in F1. He had secured a drive with Cooper's F1 team for 1965 after his spectacular drive at Crystal Park in F2. Unfortunately, the notoriously unreliable Cooper cars failed to give Rindt a chance at the World Championship. Rindt languished in the midfield for 3 years at Cooper in F1, but did continue his success in F2 concurrently, winning many races. Remember that F1 drivers were still allowed to participate at this time. These F2 races gave him a chance to demonstrate that he was still one of the best drivers in the world, despite his lackluster performance in F1, especially considering F2 was raced in equal cars unlike F1. Jackie Ickx, a rival of Rindt, once said of his F2 career, "To say that Jochen was the king of Formula 2 is to insult him, because that could indicate that there is no place for him on a higher platform." In the end, Rindt would have a total of 29 F2 victories to his name. After his 3-year contract at Cooper was up, Rindt signed with Brabham for the 1968 season. This was supposed to be his first real chance at F1 glory, as Brabham had a top-of-the-grid pedigree as the champions of previous 2 seasons. The team was on the cutting edge of racing technology, being the first team to employ the use of a wind tunnel in the design of the car. Unfortunately, this season at Brabham would prove to be incredibly disappointing, as Rindt's car only finished 2 of the 12 F1 races that year. One of the key reliability problems lay with the Repco V8 engine of the car, which by 1968 was losing competitiveness on the grid. Brabham was switching to a Ford engine in 1969, but Rindt could not afford to be seated in an uncompetitive car while the designers worked out the kinks with the new engine. Frustrated by the reliability issues of the otherwise speedy Brabham, Rindt reluctantly signed with the Lotus F1 team for the 1969 season, being paired with 1968 F1 champion Graham Hill. After joining the team, Jochen told his biographer Heinz Prühler, "I can't afford to stay with Brabham. Lotus is going to be my third team now. Lotus produces the best car, the biggest sensations. There's nothing that Colin Chapman can't realize technical-wise." Jochen was great friends with Brabham owner Jack Brabham, but could not turn down the money offered by Lotus. This decision was not made purely with financials in mind, though. Rindt also had serious concerns about the safety of the Lotus cars, which were known as fast and fragile. Safety was at the forefront of every driver's mind in 1968 due to the untimely death of famed F1 driver Jimmy Clark. The other F1 drivers were especially spooked by his death because of Clark's immense skill on the track. They believed someone of his skill could not die in the way he did, and it became a wake-up call for many of the drivers. They now knew their safety was much more up to luck than skill. Rindt, on the topic of safety, said, "The possibility of getting killed is a big one. It's just luck, good luck or bad luck, whether you can manage to survive." Desperate for a chance to prove he was the fastest driver in the world, Rindt began his first push for the championship in the Lotus in 1969. Once again, reliability issues would plague his season. His confidence in the safety of the Lotus cars, he was driving the Lotus 49B at the time, would be further shaken when he crashed at the Spanish Grand Prix that season. The Lotus team headed to Monterey Park for what would be a disastrous race. Jochen was nominated as the safety inspector for the Grand Prix by his fellow drivers in the Grand Prix Drivers Association, the F1 union. In his inspection, Jochen found the guardrails at the circuit to have been constructed too low. He requested a two-tiered barrier system to be installed before the race. Little did he know, this change would end up saving his life and that of his teammate Graham Hill. Jochen qualified on pole position for the race, with Hill qualifying third. Jochen kept the lead at the start of the race and Hill followed behind, with the Lotus cars split by Chris Amon's Ferrari. Early in the race though, as he passed the pit lane, Graham Hill would take a nasty spin into the barrier at 150 miles an hour. The spin was caused by the failure of the Lotus's rear wing. At the time, the rear wings were connected directly to the suspension of the car. This gave the car a tremendous amount of downforce, but would terribly unsettle the car if a failure occurred. This is what happened when Graham spun. Hill was incredibly lucky in the crash, surviving with just some bruises and being able to pull himself out of the car. Soon after, on lap 20, Rindt's car would face the same fate. Leading the race, Rindt came to the pit lane straight of the circuit and experienced a sudden rear wing failure eerily similar to Hill's. The quick loss of downforce caused Rindt's car to swerve to the left, hitting the left barrier, and then bouncing to the right barrier, collecting debris from Hill's crash on the way. This massive crash caused a skull fracture and broken jaw for Rindt. It could have been worse though, as Rindt's car was at one point riding on top of the first barrier of the circuit. Had Rindt not requested the addition of a second barrier, it is possible two motorsports legends could have been lost on the same day. Jochen was interviewed by Heinz Prühler after the incident. This is what he had to say. "At the very moment of impact, one doesn't do anything. One observes what is going on, rather like a third party." Rindt was upset that the move fast, break things attitude of Lotus boss Colin Chapman had almost cost him his life. Rindt would adamantly be against the use of wings in general in racing going forward. After the accident, he wrote an open letter to the motorsports world about wings. This was published in multiple motorsports magazines, and detailed his issues with the aerodynamic innovation. Among other things, Rindt expressed his frustration with the dirty air effect that wings create, which he said reduces the ability to overtake. Dirty air is created by the car in front's wings, and the car behind has a harder time steering through corners because of it. Rindt's letter shows he was much more technically adept than most would give him credit for. The turbulent effect created by racing wings is seen prominently today in F1, where drivers pursuing an opponent are allowed to use DRS, opening their rear wing, to reduce downforce in straights, compensating for the slowdown effect. In his open letter, Rindt would also express his concern for the safety of drivers with wings. The failure of his wing aided in causing a Spanish GP crash, after all, lifting the car up over the barrier with its newfound negative downforce. Jochen's letter would anger team boss Colin Chapman, who sought to innovate on the racetrack above all else. The whole event sparked a renewed interest in the safety of F1 drivers. CSI, the governing body for F1 at the time, would end up banning the high rear wings attached to suspension. This angered Chapman further, as he saw this as Jochen allowing the competition to gain an advantage. The rear wings were a new concept at the time, so not many of the teams on the F1 grid had mastered the use of them besides Lotus. Regardless, this rule change needed to be done for the safety of all drivers. Rindt finally had his first real brush with death in this crash, and he succeeded in changing the rules to further increase safety for all drivers. This is a part of his legacy that carries on today. The safety innovations created in the wake of so many driver fatalities in the 1960s paved the way for safer racing for stars of the future. Jochen helped turn what was once an unfortunate reality of racing into a rare tragedy that is not often seen in today's F1. After his crash at Montjuic, Rindt sat out the Monaco Grand Prix. He returned to F1 at the next race, the Dutch GP. His season would end up being lackluster though, as he retired in the Dutch, French, and German GPs. Despite this, he began to ramp up his efforts near the end of the season. He scored podium finishes at the Italian and Canadian Grand Prix, but the elusive first F1 win was still out of his grasp. Jochen would finally get his first taste of the F1 World Championship at Watkins Glen in 1969, the last race of that season. Jochen would be off to a fast start at the American circuit, just barely snatching pole position from Denny Hulme by 3/100ths of a second. The grid would be set with Jochen in front, leading Hulme, Jackie Stewart, and Graham Hill in that order. Jochen retained the lead at the start of the race, while Hulme fumbled, giving Stewart a chance to get on Rindt's tail. Thus ensued a battle between fiery competitors and great friends. Rindt made a mistake on the 12th lap, allowing Stewart to take the lead. On lap 20, Stewart would return the favor with an error of his own that allowed the Austrian to take the lead back. Rindt would hold off Stewart for a while as Stewart's engine began to give hints of failure. Sure enough, on lap 36, Jackie Stewart's Ford Cosworth engine blew an oil seal. He rode into the pits, and Rindt was off scot-free. The next closest driver was Piers Courage, who was half a minute behind. The race, which ran for 91 laps, had Rindt's mechanics on the edge of their seats. They were concerned that Rindt would run out of fuel, squandering yet another chance at his first F1 win. Thankfully, Rindt became one with the car and managed his fuel consumption perfectly, shattering lap records as he made his way home to victory. He would have achieved a Grand Slam too if it wasn't for Stewart taking the lead early on. In the end, Rindt scored the fastest lap and won from pole position. Rindt said of the win, "I could not believe that I was going to win until I started my last lap, and even then I was not sure what was going to break in the last few yards." Clearly, the reliability issues of his previous teams still haunted him. The finish once again demonstrated Rindt's elite skill and ability to manage his car in the most intense of situations. Other drivers might have pushed the Lotus too far and lost fuel near the very end, or caused a mechanical failure with consistent high revving. Not Rindt. He knew how to win, he just hadn't had the pieces fall into place until today. Rindt's win was also the last race of the 1969 season. The championship for 1969 had already been won by Stewart at the time, the first of his three. It was clear that the next step for Rindt after his first race win in F1 would be to finally win the World Championship. Rindt had finished 4th in the championship in 1969. It is likely he would have been even higher in the standings if he didn't have to sit out Monaco due to his injuries at Montjuic. After all, his teammate Graham Hill took the win at Monaco that year in the same car. Rindt would have to string together a streak of amazing performances in 1970 if he wanted to claim the ultimate motorsports glory, and he did just that. After only finishing 13th in the South African Grand Prix, and retiring from the Spanish GP, Rindt knew he had to pick up the pace if he wanted to reach his final goal. The third race of the season took Rindt back to Monaco, where he had never even finished a race in his F1 career before. His weekend would not start off great. He only managed to qualify 8th at the Principality. This would be an uphill battle where he couldn't coast to victory. Rindt received some advice from his unofficial manager Bernie Ecclestone before the race. "Whatever happens, don't come back to the pits today except walking. You'll always have a chance in racing. put on the pressure, carry on, you don't have to win races from the lead, especially at Monaco. Wisdom that would certainly not apply to F1 at Monaco today, but was poignant at the time. Jackie Stewart would start from pole and lead the race early on. On lap 27, an engine failure forced him to retire. Rindt remained in the middle of the pack early, only moving up to 6th due to a timely pass of Jackie Ickx and Stewart's retirement. He had started off slow, and he admitted that he was not pushing his car as hard as he could have. Suddenly, in the middle of the race, an unexplained fire erupted in Rindt's soul. Rindt maneuvered his way through the pack and used the clean air to slip by Denny Hulme and eventually grab 3rd place. Rindt was lapping as fast as Stewart was when he was still in the race. Jochen's pace was immaculate, but he would still have to pass elite March driver Chris Amon and his former boss Jack Brabham. Brabham held a slight lead over Amon, who was following only a few seconds behind. Rindt had more ground to make up as Amon had had a lead on him by about 12 seconds. A little bit of luck, which is important for all the greatest drivers to harness, appeared for Rindt on lap 61. On this lap, Amon's suspension failed, bringing Jochen to 2nd place and giving him a chance to catch Brabham. At this point, Jack had a lead of about 15 seconds on Jochen. This seemed insurmountable, but Rindt kept focused. Rindt continued to push his car to the limit. He lapped faster than Brabham, closing the gap as Brabham made mistake after mistake. This led to the gap between the two drivers closing to just 4 seconds by lap 76. Jochen's driver instincts kicked in further. On the second to last lap, he drove faster than anyone did in qualifying. Rindt recognized the chance to steal a victory at arguably the most legendary F1 track and would not give his former boss any slack. On the last lap, Rindt was within a second of Brabham. Then, a final stroke of luck hit. Brabham caved under the pressure of a flying Rindt and misjudged the braking zone into the final turn of the course. This caused him to smack into the outside barrier of the track and created the final opening Rindt needed to gain motorsports glory. And so Rindt crossed the line at Monaco, a winner. Rindt's spectacular ability to drive his car on the absolute limit, drifting the Lotus through the turns like a rally car driver, gave him the 2nd win of his F1 career. The win at Monaco also made Rindt one of only 5 drivers in history to win 2 legs of the motorsports Triple Crown: Monaco, Le Mans, and the Indy 500. This puts him up there with legends such as Fernando Alonso and Juan Pablo Montoya. His 1969 teammate Graham Hill remains the only person to ever achieve a win at all 3 events. This win would officially kick off his championship campaign. Brabham had the lead currently with 15 points, and Jochen sat tied for 3rd with 9. Jochen's engine would break down at the next race at Spa, forcing a retirement. Then he continued his championship push with an incredible streak of wins. First, he won the Dutch GP at Zandvoort, where he drove the new Lotus 72 for the first time. The car was a huge innovation and allowed Rindt to lap 7 seconds faster than Jackie Stewart's record lap time at the circuit in 1969. Rindt took pole and would lead most of the race. The win was made bittersweet by the death of his good friend Piers Courage during the race. Courage was battling for 7th place when he crashed. Courage's car burst into flames, and the accident killed him. Rindt was no stranger to death on the racetrack, nor were any of the other drivers on the grid, but this one hit hard for Rindt. He and his wife Nina were close friends with the Courages, even dining with them the night before the fateful race. The accident made Rindt question his desire to continue racing in F1. His wife Nina pleaded with him to stop. Rindt, for better or for worse, continued to challenge for the title, but the crash would be an eerie omen for what was to come for the Austrian. Nina Rindt recalled in the book Jochen Rindt, Uncrowned King of Formula One, that Jochen kept wondering after the accident, is it better to die the way Ernst did, a friend of theirs who died young of cancer, or to die instantly, like Piers? The next race and the next win was the French GP. Here he climbed his way from 6th on the grid to a win just in front of Chris Amon. This win gave him his first lead in the championship. He was just ahead of Brabham and Stewart, who were tied for 2nd. Next, the grid would be taken to Brands Hatch for the British GP. Rindt put on another great performance in qualifying, sharing pole position with the same lap time as Jack Brabham. Rindt and Brabham battled fiercely, with Brabham taking the lead late in the race. Brabham looked set to avenge his last-second loss at Monaco with a 3-second lead, but his engine had other ideas. A miscommunication with the mechanics led to the Brabham BT33 running light on fuel, and Jack would sputter and stop just 2 corners before the checkered flag. This allowed Rindt to snatch another victory from the jaws of sure defeat. Rindt's final win of the season would take place at Hockenheim for the German Grand Prix. Thousands of fans showed up to cheer on Rindt. Rindt drove under the Austrian flag, but many Germans considered him one of their own. They were ecstatic to watch their hometown hero battle it out with the world's best drivers. Formula One writer Gregor Messer, who was in attendance that day, had this to say about the event as a German fan. "It was a very hot summer day when our dad came home, tired from work. We were on our knees begging him to take us to Hockenheim to see this race. It would be one to remember." Rindt qualified second between the Ferraris of Jackie Ickx and rookie Clay Regazzoni. After some back and forth fighting on the first lap, the three pulled away from the pack and an epic duel ensued. The three drivers each took turns in the lead, but each could only keep the others at bay for a few laps. The battle narrowed down to the end with just Ickx and Rindt. Rindt would take the lead in laps 49 and 50, creating another trademark win right at the end of the race. He was only 7/10 ahead of Ickx by the end. Gregor Messer spoke on how exciting this was to watch. The 50 laps were full of tension, with Jochen fighting Jackie Ickx and Clay Regazzoni and Chris Amon also in there for a while. It was a real race. When it was over, we were really glad Jochen, our hero, had won. The win gave Rindt a comfortable lead in the championship with 45 points, though he had not officially clinched the title yet. Hockenheim would be Rindt's last complete F1 race. In the greatest irony of all, Rindt didn't know it yet, but he had done enough to become world champion at last. The next race after the German GP was held in Austria at the Österreich Ring, which is now known as Red Bull Ring. This would be the first time the famous circuit would hold an F1 race. It was especially important for Rindt, who considered himself Austrian and helped popularize motorsports in the country. Unfortunately, the race would end up uneventful for him, as he was outpaced by the Ferraris of Ickx and Regazzoni. Near the end of the race, his engine gave out, which forced another retirement. Rindt could afford to feel more relaxed about this compared to previous failures. He still held a 20-point lead in the championship, with Jack Brabham holding second place. Rindt was happy enough to perform in front of what he considered his home fans. When he jumped up on the pit lane after retiring, the throngs of Austrian fans screamed and cheered his name. The orphaned boy from Mainz had got his proverbial flowers in his adopted homeland. The next race on the calendar was to be held at Monza for the Italian GP. The circuit is known as the Temple of Speed for its high-speed bending corners and long straights. This was an even more apt nickname for the circuit in 1970, as the chicanes present at today's version of the circuit did not exist yet. The Ferraris were expected to be a formidable foe for Rindt at this circuit. The track's ability to produce major velocity favored their 12-cylinder engines compared to the Lotus's V8. Despite the challenge that lied ahead, Rindt felt comfortable. He was noted as telling his wife Nina the night before the start of practice, "I feel wonderful." The weight of proving he was the fastest man in the world could soon be lifted off his shoulders with a high points finish in Italy. Jochen began lapping the circuit in practice. He decided the track's high speed necessitated removing the wings from the car, hopefully increasing top speed. Team boss Colin Chapman agreed, and the mechanics removed Jochen's hated wings. Jochen went back out on track, testing the removal of the rear wing. He came back to the pits and reported that he received a significant boost of speed without the wing, and the team decided to go with it for the race. The removal of the wing caused major oversteer for Rindt, but he felt he could keep control of the drifting, as he had done previously with his extreme driving style. The team returned for second practice the next day, when disaster struck. Rindt went out with his Lotus with the intention of setting a few fast laps for qualifying. Rindt sped through his first 4 laps, but would not return to the pits on his 5th. Denny Hume, driving for McLaren at the time, witnessed Rindt swerve uncontrollably at Parabolica. He immediately returned to the pits to report the situation to Chapman and Jackie Stewart. Rindt's car had whipped violently left and right at the entrance of the Parabolica under braking, causing his car to smash its nose into the barrier. This caused the nose of the car to completely separate from the body. The momentum of the barrier smash, in addition to losing the nose of the car, caused it to spin violently. The force of the spin caused Rindt to slide down in the cockpit and ultimately out of the car. He had not been wearing his crutch straps, which he habitually never wore. His idea was that if the car caught on fire in an accident, he would be trapped by the straps and unable to save himself in time. His idea may have been reinforced by the death of his friend Piers Courage earlier that season, who died after his car caught on fire. The loose straps, combined with the overwhelming force of the spin, caused massive damage to Rindt's throat, likely killing him instantly. Rindt's story came to a tragic end at Monza. His death sent shockwaves across the motorsports world. In just a few years, greats like Jimmy Clark, Bruce McLaren, and Gerhard Mitter were lost. Now Rindt joined the list of drivers gone too soon. In the aftermath of the accident, an investigation revealed that it was likely a broken brake shaft that caused Rindt's car to swerve violently into the barrier. Colin Chapman, who had now lost 2 star drivers in a short time, wrote an open letter defending Lotus. Among other things, he denied any wrongdoing by describing the rigorous testing procedures that parts for the Lotus car undergo before construction. He theorized that the break of the shaft was caused by a minute defect, undetectable by the then modern testing standards. A funeral was held for Rindt in Austria. Family, friends, members of the F1 grid, and Austrian dignitaries all gathered to remember the late, great master of speed. Joe Bonnier gave the eulogy, concluding with, "Jochen will for all of us be the one and only true 1970 world champion." This was important to state, as the F1 governing body CSI debated disqualifying Rindt from the title. All of the members of the F1 grid were vehemently against it. If Rindt had the most points at the end of the season, he would most certainly be crowned champion. He would be crowned not just officially, but in the hearts and minds of all the people who he inspired and competed with. In the end, Jackie Stewart and Jackie Ickx battled in the last 4 races of the season. Ickx reluctantly used his Ferrari's newfound pace to score wins in Canada and Mexico. Stewart would win second place at Monza and retire in the last 3 races. Ickx's efforts would not be enough for the title though, as he finished with 40 points to Jochen's incredible 45. Thus, at the end of the season, Nina Rindt was presented with the championship trophy in honor of Jochen. Rindt's aggressive driving style and fearlessness on the track brought him to the greatest heights in motorsports. He won the 24 Hours of Le Mans, where he raced in a Ferrari, achieving the final win for Ferrari for 58 years. He dominated F2, collecting 29 victories against future and former F1 champions. He ended his F1 career with 6 race wins, 5 of them coming in his championship season. He won Monaco, the crown jewel of the F1 calendar, in spectacular fashion on the last lap in 1970. He even competed in the Indy 500. Rindt's legacy carries on today in multiple ways. Jochen started a motor show aptly called the Jochen Rindt Motor Show in Austria during his career. Today, the motor show still goes on as the Essen Motor Show. Rindt's fame, combined with his motorsports exhibition, contributed greatly to the rise of popularity of motorsports in Austria. This paved the way for fellow Austrian Niki Lauda's success in F1. It could be argued that the Red Bull team might not exist if it wasn't for Rindt's famous status. The team is owned by Red Bull, which is an Austrian company. Red Bull Ring, the track which hosts the Austrian Grand Prix to this day, has its penultimate corner named after Rindt. Without Rindt, F1 history, and the history of all motorsports, would have undoubtedly played out differently. Rindt remains in the hearts and minds of motorsports fans as a true master of speed. He was someone who could take the challenges of a track head-on, no matter the hardware, setup, or extenuating factors. He taught the world a lesson. Fight with all your being to steer your life into the direction of legend. May Jochen Rindt never be forgotten.